Okay, so I watched Sabine Hosenfelder versus, I'm going to call her Sabine Hosenfelder. I know that's not technically her name, but I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce her actual name. Maybe Hosenfelder. So I'll just call her Hosenfelder, make life easier. Hosenfelder, maybe? I'm not sure. I watched her versus Bernardo Kastrup the second time. I watched a little bit of the first time, put out a video that you may have watched, where I just kind of talked in general about quantum mechanics, materialism, some of the stuff pertinent. Now, full disclosure, I watched it when he reposted it. I watched it through once or twice. I think I watched it 2.5 times full through because I wanted to get the full. I wanted to really try and process it accurately. I find Bernardo Kastrup completely lucid and easy to follow, and I understand him almost completely everything he says in almost every video I've ever watched. I found her really kind of hard to parse out and understand. She speaks physics in this video. She talks like a physicist. Now, I watch a lot of her videos, actually. A lot of stuff I've learned about physics, I've learned from her. Her and Sean Carroll, probably my two go-to people on YouTube that I've learned the most of about physics in particular. Physics, quantum mechanics in particular, and then Carlo Rovelli. Carlo Rovelli read a bunch of his books. So I actually like her a lot. I found her a little difficult to follow in this particular video because she was talking more like a physicist. On her actual YouTube channel, she does some work to kind of speak down in layman's terms, so it's easier to follow. She used a lot of shorthand in this video where she'd reference something, and she even said to Bernardo a few times, obviously I can just speak freely because you basically know what you're talking about. You've studied physics. You have some background familiarity with particle physics. So she just felt comfortable to speak freely. But it made it a little hard to follow. Full disclosure also, I'm not all that interested in physics. Wait, what? Yeah. But I thought you were, I know. Don't want to burst your bubble. A lot of you think, well, you know so much about quantum mechanics, Craig. You're practically an expert. I know a lot of you think that I really, really nail it with quantum mechanics and I know so much about it. I don't really care about physics all that much outside of a certain context. Put it this way. I've watched, there's a subtext to what they discuss in this video that I'm going to get into and discuss in detail in a few minutes. And that subtext is really, 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 really important to what we do in this space, to the ongoing discussion between atheists and Christians. Outside of that, I'm not all that interested in physics. I'm a little interested in it, but I can, for example, I've watched some of Carlo Rovelli's. He has a couple of videos on the physics of time. I watch them up to a point, maybe an hour or so, and then I kind of okay, whatever. I don't really need to follow up on this. So one of the things that they were ostensibly discussing was her superdeterminism and whether it's true or not. I don't really care. It's just, I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm sure it's fine. Yeah, I'm sure it's fine, Sabina. Yeah, whatever. It's not that important. What is important, so general questions about physics, general controversies in physics are not necessarily my purview, and they're not necessarily what I'm interested in. I've zeroed in on quantum mechanics for one reason and one reason alone. And it's relevant to what we talk about in this space, Christians, the ongoing conversation between Christians and atheists. It's really relevant. Matter of fact, it's probably one of the most important things being discussed. And that was the subtext of the conversation that they were having. So there was a hidden subtext to their conversation, and you might not have caught it at first go around, but it was definitely there. The hidden subtext is this. Why I'm interested in physics before I start is because of what it tells us about the nature of what is. There are certain, one of the things I've said time and time again, physics are facts. If your philosophy is not consistent with the physics, your philosophy is mistaken. Why? Because the physics are facts, and they're evidence for. And the most important subtext of this conversation that they had is this. And Sabina and Bernardo Kastrup points this out in the beginning. Him and Sabina are of the same mind on this. There is science and there's philosophy. In principle, science doesn't teach us anything about what nature is. It doesn't have anything to say about metaphysics. That's philosophy. They both agree with that in principle. So science doesn't tell us anything about nature, what nature in fact is. It only tells us what nature does. Science makes models and predicts outcomes. That's what science does. What philosophy then does is take the data from science and try and make metaphysical speculations about the nature of reality. That's why I've zeroed in on quantum mechanics, because I think it is ruled. In particular, I think I make really strong cases, and if they're not strong enough in the videos you've already watched, they're going to get way stronger in the videos to come. But really strong cases that quantum mechanics basically debunks physicalism / materialism. That's why I've zeroed in on it. Now, that's kind of why he deals with it too. But so he says at the beginning, him and Sabine both agree in principle with that fact, that's with that statement, that science tells us nothing about the nature of what things are, which is metaphysics. It only tells us about what nature does. Science builds models and predict outcomes. Sabine would agree with that 100%. Matter of fact, she said in this video a few times, that's philosophy, that's not science. She said just like that, that's philosophy, that's not science. Said that a few times. And she'd be the first person to tell you she's not a philosopher. She's a scientist. She's building models to predict outcomes. That's what she's trying to do. Now, Bernardo says that they both agree with that in principle, but then he honestly goes on to say quite clearly in the video, this is the hidden subtext of their discussion, that she is betraying that principle. Yep, he says it outright. He says, I agree with you. We both seem to agree in principle that science is not supposed to make any claims. So science is supposed to be devoid, let's put it this way, science is supposed to be devoid of metaphysical speculations whatsoever. That is the purview of philosophers. Philosophers are supposed to read the science. Why? Because if their philosophy is not consistent with the science, hello, young earth creationists, if it's not consistent with the science, then the philosophy is most likely wrong. It has to match the science. Why? The science is evidenced for. For the most part, a lot of the empirical data is not in dispute. Almost none of it. What is in dispute is the interpretation of the data. That's philosophy. Now, she'll tell you straight up, I don't do philosophy, I'm doing science. But then he goes on to accuse her, literally outright accuse her of having, so they both agree in principle that science should be completely devoid of metaphysical speculations whatsoever. Is everyone clear on that? Science only tells us what nature does. It is not supposed to have any metaphysical speculations at all about what nature is. He then goes on to say that she has smuggled metaphysical speculations into the picture. That's the subtext. Now, it threw her a little. Because she's, and you might not have picked that up if you watched it one time through. Okay? It's there. It's really prominent. It's really there, but I had to tease it out. And you kind of have to know Bernardo Kastrup. I know Bernardo Kastrup's work really well at this point. I know what he thinks. I've read at least 5 of his books. I watch a lot of his interviews. So I almost know completely where he's going with things and why he's saying them. So none of it is mysterious to me. It seemed to be somewhat mysterious to her. Threw her a lot. She said often, you seem to be saying this, and I find it quite weird. I find it quite weird that you're saying this, because she's probably never investigated what he's doing and why he's doing it. So a lot of the things that he was basically accusing her of didn't quite register with her why he was even saying it. Now, I understood it right away because I know his work really well. And that's the nature of what he was getting at. He was basically accusing her of smuggling metaphysical speculations into her work, which by her own accord is ostensibly pure science, which means devoid of metaphysical speculations whatsoever. They both agree with that 100%. If I said this statement, science should be devoid of metaphysical speculations whatsoever. Science only makes models to predict outcomes. It only tells us what nature does. Both of them agree with that 100%. But then Bernardo would go on to accuse her of betraying that principle. That's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened, guys. I know that's not what everybody saw right at first glance, but if you watch it again after listening to this video, you'll see it clearly. Why? Because that's the subtext. And the subtext, why I preface this with the full disclosure, the subtext is 100 times more important to me than ostensibly what they were debating on the surface. I don't honestly care at all whether her superdeterminism is right or wrong. Now, full disclosure again. Okay, there's a couple of things side avenues that they got into. Some of the side avenues they got into, I'm not in any position to adjudicate properly, nor am I going to. Why? Because I don't have the time and it wouldn't be worth it. So she said more than once in the video, in their discussion, you're referencing my first experiment, my first paper. I'm talking about my second paper. Now, I'm not going to go look at the papers and decide who was right about that. I don't have the time. And like I said, the superdeterminism thing, whether she's right or wrong about that, that's not what I'm here for. That's not what I'm about. That's not what I care about. That's not relevant to this discussion, atheism versus Christianity. It's not relevant at all. Let's just say for argument's sake, she's right. What is totally relevant is the metaphysical. There is a certain reason. Let's start with Bernardo Kastrup. There is a reason. Bernardo Kastrup, keep in mind, the reason why he could follow along with her, and she said, obviously you have a background in this, because originally he was trained as a scientist. Bernardo Kastrup is both a scientist and then a philosopher, but he was a scientist first. And the reason why he became a philosopher, and this is from his own words, he says this thousands of times, 100 different interviews I've listened to. He started out as a scientist, a real scientist working for CERN, and he was researching AI. And he decided as a scientist that science had reached a metaphysical dead end. And he decided, because of his learning about the hard problem of consciousness and his work with AI. The hard problem of consciousness, I've said many times, is basically this. In principle, you have phenomenal consciousness and physical properties. And the hard problem of consciousness is, in principle, phenomenal consciousness seems irreducible to strictly physical properties. Now, he decided that a long time ago as a scientist. So then he started investigating as a philosopher, what is the metaphysics? What is the nature of what things are? Now, that's a philosophical question. That's not a scientific question. But he started coming to conclusions as a philosopher. What he does is philosophy. But he became a philosopher because he felt the science left him no options. I promise you that's all true. And then the other subtext is he believes that his philosophy is 100% consistent, 100% consistent. Remember, he was originally trained as a scientist. And if I said your philosophy has to be consistent with the science or it's mistaken, he would agree with that in principle. But he honestly believes, and I agree with him, that his philosophy is 100% consistent with the frontiers of physics and quantum mechanics. And he was accusing her of smuggling metaphysical speculations that were not warranted because her metaphysical speculations somewhat contradict that. Now, she didn't understand where he was coming from. She said that a lot. It seems really weird that you are saying this. It accused her of being bold and making bold statements. But that's really the subtext of what he was getting at. Because as far as he is concerned, the reason why he became an idealist is because materialism/physicalism had reached a dead end. He decided that based on the hard problem of consciousness, but he thinks it's 100% consistent with quantum mechanics, with the frontiers of physics, and everything that has been discovered and evidence for in physics. And I agree with it. So there was a thing that he started saying a couple things to her, and she didn't really know what to make of it. Started saying the real material world has no standalone ontology. Now, if you've been listening to my channel, you know I've said something akin to that a lot. And he brings up Carlo Rovelli and relational quantum mechanics. If you listen to my channel, I brought that up a lot. Why? Because Carlo Rovelli is also both scientist and philosopher. And he is trying to find a philosophy that is consistent with the data points. It's one of his missions. He's got a few missions. He's trying to discover loop quantum gravity, but that's another one. One of his big missions is to discover a philosophy that is consistent with quantum mechanics. He literally says we need a new philosophy, to account for quantum mechanics. So he and Bernardo Kastrup are basically on the same page with that. And relational quantum mechanics, as I've explained before, let me see if I can introduce this quickly, because it's relatively complicated. Carlo Rovelli will tell you straight up, he won't go so far as to say materialism is dead. Why? Because he's still a scientist. I don't think he has the luxury to come right out and make a bold declaration like that. Bernardo Kastrup does have the luxury to do that. Why? Because he makes his money as a YouTuber and writing books. So one of his books is called, quite plainly, Materialism Baloney. right in your face, just like that. Okay, scientist doesn't have the luxury to do that. A professional scientist. Why? Because they run on grants. That's a really, really radical thing to say in the scientific community, because science to this day considers physicalism / materialism synonymous with science. Now, Sabine tells you she doesn't. Bernardo Kastrup is basically telling you she does. She has smuggled in a metaphysical speculation into her work, into her view on things. That's what he was basically accusing her of. Does that all make sense? Is that all clear? Now, if you want to adjudicate this properly, if you're playing along at home and you really want to understand this, you should start first thing with relational quantum mechanics. On this channel, Theory of Everything, where this debate took place, there is an interview with Carlo Rovelli that is excellent. The first half hour of that interview is solely about relational quantum mechanics. Now, relational quantum mechanics, full disclosure, I 100% think that is going to become the mainstream interpretation of quantum mechanics. And I have a lot of good reasons for thinking that. First of all, Carlo Rovelli is one of the most preeminent physicists in the world today. It is basically his brainchild, more or less. But I also think it is easily the most parsimonious and consistent with the data. It basically can account for everything. Collapse of the wave function, the observer effect, the measurement problem. It does a really good job of parsing out the data and accounting for everything in the most parsimonious way fashion. The reason why he will not come out and say, I'm not a materialist / physicalist, is because I don't think he has the luxury to say that. Bernardo Kastrup will come right out and say it, I'm not a materialist, materialism baloney. Now, in Sabine's defense, as I pointed out in the first video I made, if you want the only type of interpretation of quantum mechanics that keeps materialism / physical alive, there's only two that keep it alive. One is the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. As of this hearing, that is a mainstream position in science. It should not be. Why? Because it's ludicrous. Talk about parsimonious, it is wildly inflationary. It is speculative, completely speculative, without not a shred of evidence. There's all these invisible worlds being created, all the time, infinity of invisible worlds, and we can't see them, including you. There are carbon copies of you being created all over the universe, and we can't see it or evidence for it. But we promise you it's there. Why do they hold to something that is that outlandish? Because Sabine Hosenfelder has 2 really good videos debunking it. She calls it religion, and she means that in the most disparaging Aaron Ross sense of the term. It is belief without evidence. It's faith-based conclusion. Why do they hold to it? Because it keeps materialism / physicalism alive. It keeps it alive. Other than that, relational quantum mechanics is still, as of this hearing, a minority position. I fully expect it not to be. Why? It's the most parsimonious. It makes easily the most sense and consistent with the data points. And that's the main reason. But the reason why it's been slow to catch on is because it quite clear there is a metaphysical presupposition baked into it. Materialism is over, it is dead. Why? Because reality itself, and Carlo Rovelli will tell you this, I've said this a few times in my video, he says it straight up. Quantum mechanics teaches us 3 things about the nature of reality itself, which is metaphysics, not physics. So he's a philosopher too. And he says quantum mechanics teaches us 3 things. 1, reality is granular. 2, reality is indeterminate. And 3, this is the one that ends materialism, if he's correct. Reality is relational. Bing, 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 relational quantum mechanics. Now, what does it mean? What it means is you have a series of properties. Now, the other thing that they go into a lot in this video, they go down a lot of things that in and of themselves could be a 5-hour conversation, and there's a lot of philosophical disagreements about, and a lot of contentious back and forth that could occur. For example, they start getting into a side thing on what is a measure, what is a measurement, what in fact is an observer. That's all philosophy. What is an observer and what is in fact a measurement? That was a little big side thing. But for the purposes of relational quantum mechanics, it is not a challenging question. Quantum mechanics eliminates the whole idea of an observer effect. It eliminates the whole idea that consciousness causes the collapse of the wave function. As I said, it's the most simple, most parsimonious explanation of the data, easily. What it says is that there is a set of quantum properties A, and it interacts with a set of quantum properties B, and it is upon that interaction that you have the actual. So the thing that you see in front of you, Reality itself is interactive. Now, Bernardo Kastrup has an analogy he uses to explain it. I don't think that analogy is all that clear and all that useful or good. He brought it up in here. There's the thing that you see when you're flying the airport, and there's the measurements on the dashboard. I don't think it's all that clear to explain why reality is relational. Relational. Now, so in other words, they go into another thing in this video. Again, this is really complicated stuff. So if you didn't pick any of this up, I didn't pick any of this up in the first go through. Okay, I've been dealing with this for a while. Like I said, I got really good at quantum mechanics for a season. Why? Because I thought it tells us something really important about the nature of what things are. It's the only reason I was interested in, and it's really important to atheism versus Christianity. If I'm right, if Carlo Rovelli's right, if Bernardo Kastrup is right, there's a conversation between him and Thomas Campbell, where they basically say a paradigm shift is coming to science. For 200 years, science has been dominated by physicalism/materialism, so much so that people still to this day consider it synonymous with science. You say to Sean Carroll, you a physicalist? And you go, of course I'm a physicalist. Why? I'm a scientist. I literally said, word for word, he will say that. Now, Sabine won't quite say that because she recognizes that that is a metaphysical speculation. But what Bernardo Kastrup has accused her of doing is smuggling in that metaphysical speculation without noticing it. And I believe he's correct. Really hard to adjudicate properly, especially if you don't have the deep background. I don't have a deep background, so I can't go read a paper and see if he was cited the right, but can't do any of that stuff. Probably wouldn't even understand a paper, to tell you the truth. I don't fully understand her, full disclosure. Do I have to say this part out loud? I guess I will. Too late, already said it. I listened to a super determinism video. I don't really understand it. The second to last video she put out at this point, I think it's 2 videos ago, I didn't really get it. That's the one that he accuses her of making these big, bold statements that she insists she's not making. All of it is contingent on one thing. He says a couple of things that struck her as weird, but if you know Bernardo Kastrup, you know exactly what he's talking about. The real material world has no standalone ontology. There is the desk in front of me. At the macro level, it has standalone ontology. Materialism says that the desk in front of me is a set of absolute properties. Relational quantum mechanics, and at the macro level, it may very well be. We're talking about quantum mechanics, which is at the micro level, the very small level. It is not a set of absolute properties. It is a set of relational properties. There is a subject and there is an object. The subject can be an observer. And when the subject interacts with the object, subject and object become coupled. There is a form of entanglement that takes place that cannot be disentangled. So everybody who measures a table, depending on where you look or where you measure it from or what you're looking for, you have different outcomes. Why? Because reality itself, and this isn't that hard to understand. It sounds hard to understand in this particular video because I'm not explaining it all that well. Honestly, I'm really not. But it's really not that hard to understand. It's really pretty easy to understand. It makes the most sense of quantum mechanics. They say, quantum mechanics is so trippy, it's so freaky, oh my God, it's so confused. It's not. It is inconsistent with physical/materialism. That's why they think it's so trippy, because it tells us the world is different than scientists thought it was. That's the only thing about it that makes them think it's trippy, because they're unwilling to sacrifice their previous metaphysical commitment. If you are not a physicalist/materialist and you are just put, your metaphysics on hold, it's not all that trippy and weird. What it says is subject and object are coupled. When the investigator or the observer starts dealing with the desk, there's different outcomes depending on who's looking, where you're looking from. Why? Because the desk is relational in nature. Now, he has an analogy that he uses to explain this, like I've said, the dashboard on the airplanes. I don't think it's that great or clear of an analogy. This analogy is really clear and easy to understand. There's this great philosophical question, right? If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? It's not a great philosophical question. No, it does not. Really simply, no, it doesn't. Why? Because the sound is only produced upon relationship, hello, ding, 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 in relation with the eardrum or the audio receiver. If this tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, it just moves the air. The sound, the property that the sound is only produced upon relationship, in a relation with the audio device or the eardrum. Now that's a fact. That's the God's honest truth. And that truth, it fits quantum mechanics. Because the only thing that's confusing is that scientists had a different idea about what reality actually was prior to the quantum era. If you asked the German idealism, does quantum mechanics make sense? They wouldn't have said, oh, it's so trippy, it makes no sense, oh, it's all so weird. They'd say, yeah, it makes complete sense. It's what we've been telling you for 100 years. If you ask Schopenhauer, does quantum mechanics make sense? He'd go, yeah, it makes complete sense. What I've been saying for 100 years. Subject and object are coupled. Subject and object are coupled. There is no such thing as a desk. Once there may be such a thing as a desk independent of human action. But even then, if nobody's looking at the desk and it's alone in a room, it interacts with its environment. If you leave a desk alone in a room, a steel desk, it starts to what? Rust, oxidize, relational. It starts to interact with the environment. The property known as rust is quantum set of properties A, desk, interacts with quantum set of properties B, oxygen, oxidizes. The new property created, the actual, rust is the actual property. It is created upon interaction. So prior to the quantum era, almost every physicist, every scientist, if you said, what is the nature of things, they would have said reality is like a great big mechanistic clock-like device. And we're right on the doorstep of uncovering the whole thing. Quantum mechanics shattered that paradigm. Shattered it. And they never recovered to get a different paradigm until Bernardo, Kastrup, and Carlo Rovelli came along. Why? Because it's not all that complicated. They're just lousy philosophers. It's really not all that complicated. It's philosophy. They're just lousy philosophers. And it's the same period where scientists said we shouldn't be philosophers. I swear to God, there's a whole trend in science at the exact same period where scientists said we shouldn't do philosophy at all. In the thing with when Carlo Rovelli is being interviewed on Theory of Everything, go watch that. Go watch the first half hour of Carlo Rovelli talking about relational quantum mechanics. It's really easy to understand, and you'll get a really strong idea of why it's correct. And if it's correct, materialism / physicalism is over. Carlo Rovelli won't tell you that. Why he can't, I just did. Why? Because it's inconsistent. It means that there is no standalone ontology to the real material world, just like Bernardo Kastrup said. At the macro level, there is. At the quantum level, there is not. There is no standalone ontology. Reality is interactive. Reality itself is interactive. It only is really trippy and mysterious if you had it in your mind that there's no way that could be prior to investigation. Does that make sense? Come on, that makes sense. Think about it. It only is trippy and mysterious if you had it in your mind that reality can't be interactive prior to investigation. But that's what the data points clearly tell us. That to some degree, not entirely interactive, I can't look at the desk and go, and make it disappear. With my brain, I can't go, I imagine that desk is a walrus and it turns into a wall. I can't do that. But there is some form of entanglement between the observer and the actual. And that form of entanglement produces the actual. Does that make sense? Again, go back to the tree in the forest. Tree falls in the forest, no one's there to hear it. Does it make a sound? No. No. Why? Because there's nobody there to produce hear. The hearing, the interaction with the eardrum is what produces the sound. You think of hearing as a receptive thing, but it's actually an interactive thing. The sound is only produced upon interaction. Then the new paradigm is created, which is sound. Without the ear or the audio receptacle, the air is just moving. No sound is produced. It's not that complicated, guys. Philosophers are just lousy. The scientists are just lousy at philosophy, partially because they decided to be. Now, Carlo Rovelli, on the Theory of Everything interview, he said to him, "You're a really great philosopher." Carlo Rovelli is a pretty darn good philosopher. And he said, "No, I'm not like the guys of old." And he meant Einstein, he meant Schopenhauer, who were excellent philosophers. That's what he said. He said it. I didn't say it. He said it. They were excellent. They were great at philosophy. And then somewhere along the way, and even to this day, you see atheists say there's science and they poo-poo philosophy. There's a whole trend of thought that produced that line of thinking. Science is not philosophy, but scientists should be really well versed in philosophy. Why? Because otherwise they'll come to conclusions that are erroneous and not know that they're doing it. And they'll smuggle in metaphysical speculations, which they've been doing for 100 years, and not know that they're doing it. Why? Because they're not good philosophers. Carlo Rovelli is getting great at both. He's a great scientist. He's a decent philosopher. He's a great scientist. Absolutely smashing as a scientist. He's a decent philosopher. Bernardo Kastrup is good at both, and he's been trained as both. Sabine Hosenfelder says she's not a philosopher. She even says, that's philosophy, I don't do that. That's great. Scientists don't have to do philosophy, but then they have to stop making metaphysical speculations altogether, whether they smuggle them in or otherwise. Why? Because they can't do it. So does that all make sense? Was that all clear? I get the feeling it wasn't all that clear, Craig. All right, fine. No, it really wasn't all that clear. All right, well, I guess I'll put the video out and we'll see how it lands. I'll listen to the video again. Maybe I need to parse it down even simpler. This is something I've dealt with a lot, and I'll be dealing with a lot in videos to come. Put it this way, the only thing you need to know if you're struggling to understand exactly what I'm getting at is that a paradigm shift is coming to science. I think it's going to be within the next 5 years. Thomas Campbell and Bernardo Kastrup seem to think it's 25 years in the making, 50 years in the making. Once it comes, science will dramatically change. Why? Because science has been married to an outmoded metaphysics, physicalism/materialism for a long time. And it was clear at the dawn of the quantum era that it doesn't fit the data. It doesn't make any sense. Once you throw out that metaphysical presupposition that it all has to be consistent with materialism/physicalism, then quantum mechanics mysteriously becomes not all that trippy and not all that weird. Really doesn't. So my prediction for the next 100 years is a form of idealism is going to take root. I'm not sure if it's going to be Bernardo Kastrup's version. I think it's more likely Donald Hoffman's version. It's a lot simpler, a lot more parsimonious, a lot less things you have to evidence for. Bernardo Kastrup's version is, there's some sort of unified field of consciousness thing and we're all disintended consciousness within it. Maybe, but that's speculative in nature. Donald Hoffman's version is, I am a conscious agent, part of a meta-network of conscious agents. That's really, really obviously true. Whether idealism is true or not, that's really obviously true. What am I doing right now? I'm a conscious agent. What am I talking to? Other conscious agents. What are we talking on? A network created by what? Conscious agents. The internet. Conscious agents created network. So his version of idealism is a lot more parsimonious, nothing to speculate about. It's at least true. Whether it's whether it's the ontological primitive or not, well, that's a different story. But it's at least totally true and really obviously true. I'm a conscious agent. You're listening right now, having an experience in what? Consciousness. As a conscious agent on a network created by what? Conscious agents. Hello. It's really pretty easy to figure out. And I think this will make a lot more sense to people, which we're moving into the metaverse. It's something I'm going to start introducing. 5 years from now, we're all going to be putting on goggles and go look at a wall and create this, we just start having sword fights with invisible entities. All right, idealism is going to make a lot more sense to people when we're doing that. Like it's going to naturally fit what we're experiencing in real life. It's just going to kind of go hand in glove. So idealism will become a lot more popular, make a lot more sense to people. Why? Because we're going to be dealing with stuff that makes it ring really true. Materialism was in the scientific revolution. Metaphysical presuppositions actually guide things without people knowing it. That's why I think it's going to be really important to the atheist/Christian thing. A lot of atheists are going to disappear. Why? Because if you hold to the metaphysical presupposition of materialism/physicalism with scientism, which has been a pretty dominant strain, it's been a strong strain in science and philosophy for about roughly 50 years. It's not a mysterious coincidence it produced a lot of atheists. Why? Because it logically follows that atheism would be true if those are the paradigms you're working off of. Makes complete sense as philosophy. So atheism, it's just like I asked Bernardo Kastrup when he was on my show. There's generally, when you hear the word materialism outside the context of science, what do you think of? You think of a guy who cares only about cars and money. Cars, my house. I'm a materialist. And I asked him, do you think that strain of materialism, that version of materialism, has something to do with materialism, the philosophy that came out of the scientific community? He said, yeah, absolutely. They go hand in glove. One produced the other. One produced the other. So there's a form of idealism that is coming. And then after that, there's going to be a fourth, more precise philosophy that undergirds science. It's going to be the philosophical underpinnings of science. That's my prediction. Take it or leave it. It's my prediction. There's going to be a form of idealism that's coming. I say within 5 years. Bernardo, Kastrup, and Thomas Campbell say 25 to 50 years. Doesn't matter. When it finally arrives, materialism will be thrown out the window. There will still be some materialist hanging on. It'll be a minority position. Why? It does not fit the data. It doesn't fit the data. The type of idealism I'm talking about, perfectly consistent with quantum mechanics and perfectly consistent with the hard problem of consciousness. Again, it doesn't mean you have to believe in God. This isn't necessarily, if you're an atheist, relax, deep breaths. Doesn't mean you have to believe in God. I didn't say anything that proved or evidenced for God. It just naturally follows that if people are idealists and they're putting on goggles and they're creating universes in their head, atheism doesn't quite gel with that. There'll still be atheists in the sense that I don't believe in God. I believe you stupid sky-farer crack. Okay, fine. That guy'll still be around. Okay, fine. Thank you. Got evidence because you got no evidence. You're so stupid. That guy'll still be there. But the metaphysical underpinnings of the whole concoction will have weakened enormously. They did come out of scientism. A lot of atheists still don't understand what scientism is. It's very prominent in the atheist community. Even people insist up and down that it isn't there. Use scientism or scientism, they're lean towards scientism. The Four Horsemen lean towards it. They downplay the importance of philosophy and they go, the only way to know things is science. A lot of people still say that in the atheist community to this day. I swear to God, go out there and look. I swear to God, they say it all the time. So scientism and materialism went hand in glove. They were metaphysical presuppositions that undergirded a huge chunk of the scientific community's investigations of the last 100 years. So much so that people to this day consider physicalism / materialism synonymous with science. Why? Because that has been its guiding light for a long time. It's hidden metaphysical commitment. So that's the subtext of their conversation. Did I go off on way off on a tangent? I did go off on a tangent. I accept that. But the tangent is more important than what they actually discussed. What they actually discussed, I agree with Bernardo Kastrup almost round the boards on a lot of what was said. There's a couple things in there I can't adjudicate properly. I'm not going to go look at her things and see if he was talking about the right paper. I'm not doing that. I don't care. I don't care about superdeterminism. I care about the metaphysical speculation. What I care about is the metaphysics. Why? Because that's really what's important to atheism versus Christianity. The actual physics, sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's not. It's not that important. But the metaphysics is extraordinarily relevant. And as far as I'm concerned, and as far as Carlo Rovelli is concerned, Carlo Rovelli is more important than me. Argument from authority. Yeah, yes, he's an authority on physics. And this is what he says, and you should take him seriously. Why? Because he knows a lot about physics. He's probably the most preeminent physicist in the world today. Him and Roger Penrose. Those are probably the two best physicists out there. And Amina Amaki Ahmed. That guy's freaking crazy intelligent. I'm going to introduce his stuff in the next year or so. Doom of space-time is doomed, guys. Get ready for it. Get ready. Why? Space-time is doomed is going to be the next leg that I introduced. There's a couple really interesting speculative theories about what the nature of things are. One by Penrose, that space-time itself will give way to something more fundamental. That's going to be the next thing I start talking about at some point. Haven't decided when. I don't really know it well enough to just start. I blab. My videos are blah, blah, blah. They're just me, blah, blah, blah. You get that, right? It's just me sort of improvising, ad-libbing, just kind of talking. In order for me to do that successfully, I kind of really got to know the topic well enough to just talk off the top of my head. Other than that, I can't do it. I don't know it well enough yet. But there's a theory out there that space-time itself is doomed. That Amina Akami Ahmed, I don't know how to pronounce his name, and Donald Hoffman are both on that page. That's the next leg of this journey. There's something far more fundamental from which space and time emerged from. That's what they're saying on the frontiers of physics. Now, that's still speculation. That's not proven or evidenced for, but that speculation makes a lot of sense to me, and I think it's correct. Just intuitively, I'm like, yeah, that sounds right. So that's the next place where I'm headed with this stuff. Once I process it well enough to just talk about it. So outside of that, I think that was all. Yeah, it was rambly, I understand. It was really rambly, Craig, more so than usual. All right, fine. But, there's still some good, solid stuff in there, if you ask me. there's a whole metaphysical conversation that is the purview of the philosopher. It is 100 times more relevant than everything being discussed between atheists and Christians on does the Bible say X and why does it say that? It's 100 times more relevant. Why? Because if I'm correct, and I'm almost positive I'm correct, and I'll have videos coming out that evidence my case really strongly, a lot of atheism is going to disappear. Why? Because the metaphysical presuppositions that undergird it will have been eliminated. That's why. Those metaphysical presuppositions do not prove God, but they automatically create atheists. Why? Because it doesn't leave you much other options. Atheism makes sense. If materialism and scientism are true, then atheism logically follows from that. Is that clear? That's why. And that's the thing that I'm interested in. Because I do not think it is consistent with the physics. And the physics are the facts. If your philosophy does not fit the physics, your philosophy is mistaken. It needs to be junked and thrown out. Physicalism/materialism is the philosophy, and it don't fit the facts. The facts don't match. It doesn't fit the data points. It is inconsistent with what we have discovered in physics. It doesn't work. That's why they say, quantum mechanics is so mysterious, so trippy, it's so weird. It's not all that weird. You just can't presuppose physicalism/materialism. Then it works. Or then it makes some sense. So I think that was clear. No, rambly. All right, well, whatever. As clear as I can make it at this particular juncture. How about that? And then somewhere down the way, I'll clean it up even more, tie it up in a pretty little package, and all of you will understand it. All of you will understand and go, wow, that Craig Reed really nailed it 2 years ago. I wish I'd listened to him. He really nailed it. I thought he was, I thought it was full of garbage. And actually, he was totally nailing it the whole time. Yep, the whole time, but totally nailing it. So, there you have it, kids. That is all for now. It's a cool video. Watch it. I say watch it, but, there's a lot. I guess you'll like it. Let me know if you like it. How about that? If you like it, let me know. It's worth watching for sure. But if you don't have the background in physics, most of the people listening don't have the background in physics to parse it out and adjudicate it properly. It takes you 1 or 2 listens to even kind of get clear on what exactly they're talking about. And they go down a lot of side alleys like, what is an observer? What is the nature of an observation? What is the nature of a measurement? And there's a couple of things in there that are hard to adjudicate for the layman. But why I talked about it anyways is because most of that stuff ain't relevant to why I latched on to quantum mechanics to begin with. Because what it tells us about metaphysics, the nature of what things are, rules some things out of the realm of possibilities. Why? Because it's inconsistent with the data. So, there you have it, kids. That's all for now. The mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.